Hello everyone, my name is Nadia Kort and I'm the coordinator of the International Master Program Prototyping Future Cities. Today we are having a webinar with great tutor of one of our course, recording sociologist Sofya Gavrilova. Before starting the main topic of the webinar, I would like to say a couple of words about the Master Program Prototyping Future Cities, where Sofya is teaching and where I'm coordinating the contents. So this is an international master program with a key focus on city development at the age of digital transformations and digital technologies. But apart from the thing that at this master program we're dealing with the technological side of urban development, we're also having a bunch of courses connected with the more soft skills and more soft subjects as readings, as philosophy, as sociology. Also, we're dealing with the tools and strategies, how to look at the city from different scales, how to analyze the city from different scales and from different angles. So I'm really happy that today we're having this webinar because it gives the new perspective, how to deal with the urban environments and how to analyze cities and how to look at the cities. Sofya will develop this topic a little bit later right now. So I'm really happy to see all of you here today with us. And in the chat, we are going to share with you some links to the website of the master program and our social media. So stay tuned, and I'm happy to present Sofya.
Thank you, Nadia. I must admit it's my first webinar ever, so I'm really thrilled to talk to you, though I would prefer all of you to sit in front of me so we could have really nice live talk. So please, I encourage all of you to chat, to write me messages in our chat so we can communicate, because right now I would really love all of us to have very live and vibrant discussion. So let me start by introducing myself. My name is Sofya Gavrilova, and I'm from both High School of Economy and University of Oxford. I do postdoc there, and I teach at the master program that Nadia had just advertised. I'm trying to live both countries, both cities. I'm trying to do my scientific work and teach. I really love engaging with students, and I hope that, and the most important thing that is, which I really admire in students and in the process of teaching, is actually to develop critical thinking in all of you. I like to question very simple, from the first perspective questions, and have very long and complex answers to that. I like to challenge the way you think about urban environment, about cities, about places, and that is what I'm going to do with you tonight. I'm a geographer, so my first education, my background is in geography. I was doing physical geography from the very beginning of my career. Now I'm doing more kind of cultural studies and human geography. And the course that I'm teaching in the High School of Economy, one of the courses that I teach, is dedicated to as Nadia said, is called Recording Sociology. And it is dedicated to something very subjective, and is placed in the boundary of your own perception of the city, of a place, of a topic, and how you can incorporate that in a broader scientific analysis. So what we're doing actually with my students, we take cameras, we take mobile phones with photo cameras, and we go in the city and we try to develop our own methods of approaching places, spaces among us, and try to do visual sociology and ethnography of the city. I will come to that in the end, but before that, while I'm talking, I really want to encourage you, all of you, to write me a couple of words in our chat just to introduce yourself if you feel comfortable of doing that, saying where you're from, Do you have any questions right now, straight away, for me? Do you want something? Is there anything you want me to cover in particular? Do you have any expectations? So please, I would really feel more comfortable and more relaxed if I see you engaging with this webinar. And let's jump straight to the beginning, to our first slide. Thank you. So what we gonna look at today? So today, oh, I see some beautiful people from Kyrgyzstan. Last year I have a lot of students from Central Asia, and I really love working with these students. Anyway, thank you for messaging me. Thank you. I'm really glad I see some names that are familiar for me as well. So what we're gonna do today? We're gonna start actually by questioning what are the cities we're living today. What is this concept of smart cities, intelligent cities, whatever they call them? What is that? What is there in the core of the question? Then we're going to speak how this is connected with big data. So what is big data? And I'm famous in our urban community for being very skeptical about urban data. Then we will jump into the critiques of big data and talk about what actually big data do to the researchers, and how we can use it, and what are advantages and main, not only advantages but disadvantages as well. So what are the main disadvantages of big data and how they are challenged in the contemporary research, and what are the alternatives? So if we don't follow this trend of analysis of big data for researching, creating, sharing data about the city and about the urban environment, what can we do? You know, what are other approaches? Thank you very much for for writing who you are and where you're from. I want to say yes. I'm really glad I see some of the students from Moscow State University, where I originally came from cartographic department, and greetings to India, and thank you very much for finding time to joining us, and thank you my ex-students to joining us as well. If you have, as I said, if you have any questions right now, or you want something specific to be addressed during this webinar, please feel free to share that while I'm talking. And I want to start by this citation. Will you share the slides afterwards? I think so. I don't see the reasons why not. So I think we will be happy to. Well, I'm very happy to share the slides afterwards. If you find that there is anything you can find useful in them. I want to start by this citation. We need to open a discourse where there is no effective discourse now about the varying temporalities, specialities, and materialities that we might represent in our database, with a view to designing for maximum flexibility and allowing as possible for emergent polyphony and polychrony. Raw data is both an oxymoron and a bad idea. To the contrary, data should be cooked with care. So what it is about, why I started my webinar with this particular citation, is actually because of the last phrase, data should be cooked with care. And that's something that I want to make the main point of my whole talk today. And I hope that there is something that could be helpful for you, not only today, but through all of your career. Doesn't matter whether you want to become a researcher, urban planner, or practitioner, that don't take data, any data, as given. Data should be cooked, Data should be prepared. Data should be analyzed by professionals, of an area. It should be introduced into the theoretical framework. It should be wrapped up with ideas, and then it should be presented and conclusions should be made. We will talk about it more tonight, how this process, this long process of data proceeding gets shut today, and why is that? But I want you all to think very carefully. Sorry, I'm very trapped with the chat. Thank you. Just continue doing what you are doing. It's really interesting. So I want all of you to think about it very, very critically. And one of the questions that somebody have already asked: importance of critique. Why it is important actually to question what we say and what we do. You know, I'm one of those persons who are scholars and who try not to engage with any research made not with which are somehow aligned not only with my own interest. What I'm saying that I'm a very rare person who believes that it might be a production of knowledge which is not somehow driven by any, I don't know, business interests, development interests, that they might be production of knowledge in its own. So to be able to do that, to be able to produce new knowledge and new theories, and to move forward what we call, you know, the big science, we might be brave enough to question everything we see, everything is given to us, even if it's already set in stone. So I think it's really important to develop this agenda, to develop this vision, because it's not only about how you think, it's also about how you see. And that's exactly what we're doing in our classes. You know, it's really hard to first unseen the city, to look at the city as a stranger, to question it, and then go and research it, and then to create new vision, new, maybe more unblurred, more clear vision of your own city. So yes, the critique is very important. What is more important is productive critique. Is when you don't say, oh, this is not interesting, this is untrue, but when you say, you know, I think, and it's also important in, you know, your essays, your visual works, your professional conversations. It's really important to say, well, you know, maybe you should have a look at this theory, and if we marry these two theories together, or this data, this approach, and this theory, maybe there would be something new or some other understanding of the process. So I'm always saying yes, positive critique is very important. And if you want to develop something new, if you want to be able to think new and produce new theories and new approaches, yes, please do question what is given to you always. Okay, back to the business. Smart cities. So where do we live? So what is this new era of the cities which we all said we live in? Smart cities is a term that has gained traction in academia, business, and government to describe cities that, on one hand, are increasingly composed and monitored by computing, and on the other, whose economy and governance is being driven by innovation, creativity, and entrepreneurship, and acted by smart people. So when we're talking about smart people, smart cities, people usually think that it's either they are overwhelmed, they are imposed by the technologies in the urban environment, or their economy, the government and development is somehow connected with the new technologies. What are other terms that are floating in there in academia and mostly in policy and business and government? Wired cities, intelligent cities, sentient cities, all these terms are somehow, as you know, are there right now to describe the processes that are happening in the urban environment. And for the past 2 decades, I'm listening and reading you. I'm just reading some of my notes from the computer. For the past 2 decades, urban analysts and theorists have been charting the evolution of cities during an era where information and communication technologies, what they call IST, have been exerting a growing and pervasive influence on the nature, structure, and enactment of urban infrastructure, management, economics, activities, and everyday life. Cities which have embraced ICT as a development strategy, being pioneers in embedding digital infrastructure and system into their urban fabric and utilizing them for entrepreneurial and regulatory effect, have been variously labeled as wired cities. That's exactly what I told you a minute ago. The term smart city has been variously defined within the literature. So many different scholars were trying to present their own ideas of what these future smart cities, which I currently live in, present. But as you can see it from the definition, they can broadly be divided into two distinct but related understandings as to what makes the city smart. On one hand, the notion of the smart city refers to the increasing extent to which urban places are composed by everywhere. As I said, building management system, digital controlled utility services, sensor and cameras, everything which gives the opportunity to monitor, manage, and regulate city and the processes which are happening in the city. On the other hand, the notion of the smart city, as you can see in the definition on your screen, is seen to refer more broadly to the development of a knowledge economy, within a city region. From this perspective, a smart city is whose economy and government is being driven by innovation. So it's somewhere there how the city is governed and proceeds. Okay, let's leave it there for a second. One of the vital conjoint between these two visions of a smart city is the prioritization of data capture and analysis as a means of underpinning evidence-informed policy development, enacting new modes of technocratic governance, empowering citizens through open, transparent information, and stimulating economic innovation and growth. So this data is something which sticks these two understanding of a smart city together. Such data are seen as providing objective, neutral measures that are free of political ideology as to what is occurring in the city, with the weight of data speaking inherent truth about social and economic relations, and those providing empirical evidence for policy and practice. You see? So in this context, the data is approached as something neutral, data produced within the city, right? Is seen as something neutral, as something as on the edge of the democracy, right? Which has no political tone, which help us to develop better cities for the people. You will see why I'm making quotes in a second, why I'm questioning that. And yet, there has been to date little critical focus on how the new forms of data being produced or not produced how they are being mobilized by business, government, and citizens, and the application of real-time data analytics. So what is there on this very important intersection of the smart cities and big data? There has long been the production of very large data sets, such as national census, governmental records, and surveys that provide information about the cities and their citizens. It's nothing new. Likewise, business have collected significant amounts of data about their operation markets and customers. However, these data sets often rely on samples and are generated on a non-continuous basis. The number of variables are quite small, and they are aggregated to a relatively coarse spatial scale, and are often limited in access. As a result, these large data sets have been completed by what might be termed as small data. So this, our old school data, is already been claimed being small data. And the whole idea of small data studies, referring to the pre-big data period analysis, has already emerged. So the main claim of the small data studies is that the small data captures relatively limited samples of data that are tightly focused, time and space specific, restricted in scope and scale, and relatively expensive to generate and analyze to provide additional depth and insight with respect to specific phenomena. Much of what we know about the cities to date has been gleaned from studies from the studies of these small data. But the hype of the big data is a transformation in the knowledge and governance of the cities through the creation of data deluge that seeks to provide much more sophisticated, wider scale, finer-grained, real-time understanding and control of urbanity. There is no agreed academic or industry definition of big data, though, but a survey of the emerging literature denotes a number of key features. So let's now see what are these key features. They are on your screen. So it's huge in volume, terabytes and petaterabytes of data, high in velocity, being created in or near real time, diverse in the variety. I'm sorry, Daria. If I'm reading your question clear, I'm teaching at the High School of Economy, Shukhov Lab. If your question is related to where I'm teaching. If you're asking me where I was studying, I have my background at Moscow State University and Oxford. So, 3, big data are diverse in the variety, and this is really important, and they being structured and unstructured in nature, and they are quite often temporal and spatially referenced. They're exhaustive in scope, striving to capture entire population or systems, or at least much larger sample sizes that will be employed in traditional small data studies. Fine-grained in resolution, aiming to be as detailed as possible, and uniquely indexable in identification. Relational in nature, containing common fields that enable to conjoining of different data sets. Flexible, holding the traits of extensionality and scalability, so they can expand in size and add new fields. So I'm not saying that this is set in stone definition of big data. I said quite opposite, that there was the field of academic field of big data has not been developed yet so widely as it was in industry and policy making, and there are no unified understanding of what big data is. What you see in your slide is just the common traits that professionals and experts usually pick. In other words, the majority of people agrees that big data consists of massive, dynamic, very detailed, interrelated, low-cost data sets that can be connected and utilized in diverse ways, those offering the possibility of studies shifting from data scarce to data rich, static snapshots to dynamic unfoldings, coarse aggregation to high resolution, relatively simple hypotheses and models in more complex, sophisticated simulations and theories. This is the sources of big data. Let me just check. We want to go. No, let's stick to that one for a while. The sources of big data can be broadly divided into three main categories. This is directed, automated, and volunteer data. I don't want to go to detail. Sorry, I was reading the question. I will answer it in a minute. So there are different sources how these data can be generated, right? Directed data are generated by traditional form of surveillance, as the small data was operating with. Such systems include immigration passport controls, and others. Sorry. There are a number of different means by which, passport controls, CCTV cameras, photographs, fingerprints. All of that is what they say traditional small data sources and directed production of big data now. In the case of automated data generated as inherent automatic function of the device or a system. There are a number of different means by which automated data are produced, including capture systems, in which the means of performing a task captures data about that task, for example, such as scanning items at a checkout till being used to monitor the till operator's performance, as well as collecting information with regards to the item which were bought, right? Digital services such as mobile phones that record and communicate the history of their own use, transactions, and interactions across digital networks that not only transfer information but generate data about the transaction and interactions themselves, such, for example, as the logs of payments or bank transfers or emails. Clickstream data that records how people navigate through a website or app, and so on. In contrast, the volunteer data are gifted by users. These include interactions across social media, such as the posting or comments, observations and the uploading of photos or social networking sites such as Facebook and Twitter. Crowdsourcing data, as, for example, the generation of GPS trackers, which goes directly to OpenStreetMap's crowdsourcing software, and so on and so forth. Let's now go back to let's now switch to our next slide. And before we do that, I will answer the question. So the question, I think all of you see that, but I'll just read it to understand it correctly. So basically, indexical modeling of data to predict future of urban area. Say, for example, with pre-existing data of traffic of an urban area, new trafficking patterns can be introduced, right? Yes, I think you are correct. The question is, so if you're asking whether big data can be able to predict further patterns, yes, of course, in the majority of cases, we can do that. But the question is, what are the disadvantages and how exact will be your model? So let me now switch to that part, the part of the critiques of the big data and the approaches, so we can actually see that there might be a lot of possibilities for the big data analysis, but there are some things we should be aware of when we're doing that. So this definition is a bit different from the one that I just gave you before. Because this is not about the key features of analysis or of the data, but big data proceed as a social phenomena. And big data here is approached as cultural, technological, and scholarly phenomenon that rests on the interplay of technology, analysis, and mythology. Why? Where is the mythology? Why? How it occurs here? So the thing is that technology in relation to big data is quite understandable, right? It's maximizing computation power and algorithmic accuracy to gather, analyze, link, and compare large data sets. So our list from the previous slide goes in here in technology. The second is the analysis itself, and drawing on the large data sets to identify patterns in order to make economic, social, technical, and legal claims. So this is what we can do with data, as the previous question was asking, what we can do with that. And number three is mythology. And mythology deals with a widespread belief in the society that large data sets offer a higher form of intelligence and knowledge that can generate insights that they were previously impossible, with the aura of truth, objectivity, and accuracy. And this is the point of critique I was promising you to introduce. So big data, in other words, when you hear big data, there is widespread popular belief that it means that the data and the analysis and the result is objective, and we jump right to the beginning of the 20th century, when people used to believe that there are facts and the objective truth about the laws of nature and society, and we all live in postmodern era, and we know that it's not how the world and the science works and operates. But still, people believe in that. And we also believe that the big data provides not only truth and objectivity, but accuracy, right? And generates something new, some fantastic facts and knowledge that we were unaware of. Let us now see whether it's truth or not. And I'm going back to my paper, and so diverse groups of scientists, of traditional small data scientists, argue about the potential benefits and costs of analyzing social media interactions, health records, all of the we were speaking of, phone logs, government records, blah blah blah. That's a common trend now. Every scientist, even if he wants nothing to do with the big data, he needs to react. Do I have a slide about that? Yes. So we all end up facing that question: will large-scale search data help us create better tools, better services, public goods, produce new knowledge, create new theories, or not? Or is just another hype? Or will it usher a new wave of privacy and incursions and invasive marketing? Will data analytics help us understand online communication and political movements? Or will analytics be used to track protesters and suppress free speech? Big data, the term itself, in many ways, is a poor term. Lev Manovich, I hope that many of you have heard of him. If not, please Google him. He's one of the major theorists of cultural data right now. So Lev Manovich observes that it has been used in the science, the term big data, to refer to datasets large enough to require supercomputers, but what once required such machines can now be analyzed on desktop computers with standard software. There is a little doubt that the quantities of data now available are often quite large, but that is not the defining characteristics, you see what I mean, of the new data ecosystem. In fact, some of the data encompassed by big data, like Twitter messages, for example, are not nearly as large as earlier data sets that are not considered as big data, for example, census data. Big data is less about data that is big than it's about a capacity to search, aggregate, and cross-reference large data sets. Just think of it again. Twitter messages might be less the amount of data, less big data, as the census, the country census, national census. So when we hear big data, always question it. Always think what actually people mean by that. Like other social technical phenomena, big data tricks both utopian and dystopian rhetoric. On one hand, big data is seen as a powerful tool to address various societal ills, offering the potential of new insights into areas as diverse as cancer research, terrorism, and climate change. On the other hand, big data is seen as a troubling manifestation of Big Brother, enabling invasions of privacy, decreased civil freedoms, and increased state and corporate control. As with all social technical phenomena, the currents of hope and fear often obscure the more nuanced and subtle shifts that are underway. How we handle the emergence of an era of big data is critical. While the phenomena is taking place in an environment of uncertainty and rapid change, current decisions will shape the future. With the increased automatization of data collection and analysis, as well as algorithms that can extract and illustrate large-scale patterns in human behavior, it is necessary to ask which systems are driving these practices and which are regulating them. One of the scholars, philosopher of science, Lessing, argues that social systems are regulated by four forces: market, law, social norms, and architecture. Or, in the case of technology, code. When it comes to big data, these four forces are frequently at odds. The market sees big data as pure opportunity. Markets use it to target advertising, insurance providers use to optimize their offerings, and Wall Street bankers use it to read the market. Legislation has already been proposed to curb the collection and retention of the data, usually over concerns about privacy. Features like personalization allow rapid access to more relevant information, but they present difficult ethical questions and fragment the public in troubling way. There are some significant and insightful studies currently which being done that involve big data, but it's still necessary to ask critical questions about what all these data means, who get access to these data, how data analysis is deployed, and to what ends. In the remaining part of our presentation, I will offer 6 provocations and 6 questions to spark conversation about the issues of big data. First, big data changes the definition of knowledge. In the early, big data not only refers to very large data sets and tools and procedures used to manipulate and analyze them, but also to computational turn in thought and research. Big data creates a radical shift in how we think about the research. I don't know whether you are over working on any research or in academia at all, but this is something that you need to believe me, which is really happens. When you've got new methods and new data available, you pose the research question differently. Because when you just work normally, the question, where do I get proof, or how will I approach that, or how will I get to know some facts, is the one which emerges on a very early stage of your research. So if you have this common knowledge that there is big data and new methods of analyzing them, then you structure your research differently. It is neither just a matter of scale, nor is enough to consider it in terms of proximity, or what Moretti, one of the leading scholars of digital literacy, refers to as distant or close analysis of text. Rather, it is a profound change at the levels of epistemology and ethics. Big data reframes the key questions about the constitution of knowledge, the process of research, how we should engage with information, and the nature and categorization of reality. There is a world where massive amounts of data and applied mathematics replace every other tool that might be brought to bear. Out with every theory of human behavior, from linguistics to sociology. Out with forget taxonomy, ontology, and psychology. Who knows why people do what they do? The point is, they do it, and we can track it and measure it with unprecedented fidelity. With enough data, the number speaks for themselves. Do they actually speak for themselves? We believe the answer is no. Significantly, as I said from the beginning, the numbers, the data should be cooked. The numbers do not speak for themselves. And the big data does not provide any answer without proper theoretical and background wrapping. Second, claims to objectivity and accuracy are misleading. Big data offers the humanistic, but not only humanistic, disciplines a new way to claim the status of quantitative science and objective method. The story is not new, you know. We in various scientific disciplines, how do they call it? There was the special turn, and there was the digital turn. You know, the turns to numbers. It's just, I just forgot the term, which was there in place from the middle 60s. So from the middle 60s, sociologists, urban planners, geographers were obsessed with numbers. But big data now claims that everything what deals with numbers, it's their territory. It makes many more social spaces quantifiable. In reality, working with big data is still very subjective, and what it quantifies does not necessarily have a closer claim on objective truth, particularly when considering messaging from social media sites. But there remains a mistaken belief that quantitative researchers are in the business of producing facts. In this way, big data risk reinscribing established divisions in the long-running debates about scientific method and the legitimacy of the social science and humanistic inquiry. The notion of objectivity has been a central question for the philosophy of science and early debates about the scientific method, as I said, in the beginning of in the end of 19th and beginning of 20th century. Claims to objectivity suggest an adherence to the sphere of objects, those things that they exist in and for themselves. Subjectivity, on the other hand, is viewed with suspicions, colored as it is with various forms of individual and social conditioning. The scientific method attempts to remove itself from the subjective domain through the application of dispassion process, whereby hypotheses are proposed and tested, eventually resulting in improvements of knowledge. Nonetheless, claims to objectivity are necessarily made by subjects and are based on subjective observations and choices. All researchers are interpreters of the data. Data need to be imagined as data in the first instance, And the process of the imagination of data entails interactive base. Every discipline and disciplinary institution has its own norms and standards of the imagination and thinking of the data. As computational scientists have started engaging in acts of social science, there is a tendency to claim their work as the business of facts and non-interpretation. And again, a model may be mathematically sound, an experiment may seem valid, but as soon as researchers seek to understand what it means, the process of interaction has begun. This is not to say all interpretations are created equal, but rather that not all numbers are neutral. The design decisions that determine what will be measured also stem from interpretation. For example, in the case of social media data, there is a data cleaning process which is about making decision what attributes and variables will be counted and which will be ignored. This process is inherently subjective. As Boiler, and I think it's a citation of your slide, as Boiler explains, as a large amount of raw information, big data is not self-explanatory. And yet the specific methodologies for interpreting the data are open to all sorts of philosophical debate. Can the data represent an objective truth, or is any interpretation necessarily biased by some subjective filter of the way the data is cleaned? Okay, jumping to number 3. Bigger data are not always better data. Social scientists have long argued that what makes their work rigorous is rooted in their systematic approach to data collection analysis. Ethnographers focus on sorry, I was reading the question. Ethnographers focus on on accounting for bias and the interpretation. Experimentalists control and standardize the design of the experiment. Survey researchers drill down on sampling mechanism and question bias. Quantitative researchers weight up statistical significance. These are but a few of the ways in which social scientists try to assess the validity of each other's work. Just because big data presents us with large quantities of data does not mean that methodological issues are no longer relevant. Understanding sample, for example, is more important now than ever. And this is one of the things that I, in my research and in the work which I do on a daily basis, really feel that methodology and methods of working on data, I'm not talking about the software, I'm talking about the scientific methods, are not coping. They don't have time to develop themselves to be able to handle the amount of data which big data provides. Twitter, let's talk about Twitter in this context, does not represent all people, right? And it's an error to assume that people and Twitter users are synonymous. They're a very particular subset of people. Neither is the population using Twitter representatives of the global population, nor can we assume that accounts and users are equivalent. Some users have multiple accounts, while some accounts are used by multiple people. Some people never establish an account and simply access Twitter via the web. I do so. Some accounts are bots that produce automated contact without directly involving a person. Furthermore, the notion of an active account is problematic. While some users post content frequently through Twitter, others participate as listeners. Twitter has revealed that 40% of active users sign in just to listen. The very meaning of user and participation and active need to be critically examined in that context. Big data and whole data are not the same. Without taking into account the sample of a data set, the size of the data sets is meaningless. For example, a researcher may seek to understand the topical frequency of tweets. Yet if Twitter removes all tweets that contain problematic words and content, such as referring to pornography or spam from this team, the topical frequency would be inaccurate. Regardless of the number of tweets, it is not a representative sample as the data is skewed from the beginning. Twitter has become, well, I'm talking about Twitter only because the Twitter has become a very popular source for mining big data, but working with Twitter data has serious methodological challenges that are really rarely addressed by those who embrace them. When researchers approach a data set, they need to understand and public account for not only the limits of the data set, but also the limits of which questions they can ask of a data set and what interpretations are appropriate. So during this computational turn, it's increasingly important to recognize the value of the small data. Research insights can be found at any level, including at very modest scales. In some cases, focusing just on a single individual can be extraordinarily valuable. And I want to give, well, we don't have a lot of time, and I don't want to give you these examples, but when we're talking about the ethnographical research or sociological research, when we're talking about specific cultural groups or people in the city or in the suburbs, one person and his interview and his view might be more valuable and might give you more information about on the question that you are researching. Yeah, okay, I will give you an example. One, take for example the work of one of the sociologists. I will send it over to you. The name Vionet. And his research in 2007, who followed one worker who was an inspector at a hydroelectric utility company in order to understand the information practices of blue-collar worker. In doing this unusual study, Vionet reframed the definition of information practices away from the usual focus on early adopter, white-collar workers, to spaces outside of the offices and urban context. Her work tells a story that could not be discovered by framing millions of Facebook or Twitter accounts, and contributes to the research field in a significant way, despite the smallest possible participant count. As I said, one person. The size of data should fit the research and the question that's been asked. In some cases, small is the best. Four, taken out of context, big data loses its meaning. Because large data sets can be modeled, data are often reduced to what can fit into mathematical model. Yet taken out of context, data lose meaning and value. The rise of social network sites prompt an industry-driven obsession with a social graph. Thousands of researchers have flocked to Twitter and Facebook and other social media to analyze connections between messages and accounts making claims about social networks. Yet the relations displayed through the social media are not necessarily equivalent to the sociograms and kinship networks that sociologists and anthropologists have been investigating since the 1930s. The ability to present relationships between people as a graph does not mean that they convey equivalent information. Historically, sociologists and anthropologists collected data about people's relationships through surveys, interviews, observations, and experiments. Using this data, they focused on describing people's personal network, the set of relationships that individuals develop and maintain. These connections were evaluated based on a series of measures developed over time to define personal connections. Big data introduces two new popular types of social networks derived from data traces: articulated networks and behavioral networks. Both these networks have great value to researchers, but they are not equivalent to personal networks. For example, although contested, the concept of the tie strength is understood to indicate the importance of individual relationships. When mobile phone data suggests that workers spend more time with colleagues than their spouse, this does not necessarily imply that colleagues are more important than spouses. Measuring tie strength through frequency of or public articulation is a common mistake. Tie strength, and many of the theories built around it, is subtle reckoning in how people understand and value their relationships with other people. Not every connection is equivalent to every other connection, and neither does frequency of contact indicate strength of relationships. Further, the absence of connection does not necessarily indicate that relations should be made. Data are not generic. There is a value to analyze data abstractions, yet retaining context remains critical, particularly for certain lines of inquiry. Context is hard to interpret as scale, and even hard to maintain when data are reduced to fit into model. Managing context in light of big data will be an ongoing challenge for all of us. 5. Just because it is accessible doesn't make it ethical. And this is one of the most popular critique of the big data. I'm sure everyone have heard about it. That what do we call this public data on social media sites, for example? Can it simply be used without requesting permissions? Our posts on the Facebook, which are open to everyone? What constitutes best ethical practice for the researchers of big data? All of these questions have been addressed, but have never been approached, and there is still no answer to that. Very little is understood about the ethical implementation underpinning the big data phenomenon. Should someone be included as a part of a large aggregate of data? What if someone's public blog post is taken out of context and analyzed in a way that the author never imagined? What does it mean for someone to be spotlighted or to be analyzed without knowing it? Who is responsible for making certain that individuals and communities are not heard by the research process? What does informed consent look like in that case? It may be unreasonable to ask researchers to obtain consent for every person who posts a tweet, but it's problematic for researchers to justify their actions as ethical simply because the data is accessible. Just because content is publicly accessible does not mean that it was meant to be consumed by just anyone. There are serious issues involved in the ethics of online data collection and analysis. The process of evaluating the research ethics can be ignored simply because the data are simply public. Researchers must keep asking themselves and their colleagues about the ethics of the data collection, analysis, and publications. Limited access to big data create new digital divides. In one of the early essays on the big data, one of the media theorists, Golder, quotes sociologist Homans, which have wrote that the methods of social science are daring time and money and getting dearer every day. Historically speaking, collecting data has been always hard, time-consuming, and resource-intensive. Much of the enthusiasm surrounding big data stems from the perception that it offers easy access to massive amounts of data. But who gets the access? For what purpose? In what contexts? And with what constraints? While the explosion of the research using datasets from social media sources would suggest that access is straightforward, it's anything but. Lev Manovich again points out that only social media campaigns have access to really large social data, especially transactional data. An anthropologist working for Facebook or sociologist working for Google will have access to data that the rest of the scholarly community will not. Some companies restrict access to their data entirely. Others sell the privileged access for a fee, and others offer small data sets to university-based research. This produces considerably unevenness in the system. Those with money or those inside the company can produce a different type of research than those who are outside. Those without any access can neither reproduce nor evaluate the methodological claims of those who have privileged access. In addition to that, in addition to the question of access, these are questions of skills, right? Wrangling API, scraping, analyzing big swatches of data is a skill set generally restricted to those with a computational background and those who have access to it. And finally, the difficulty and expense of gaining access to big data produce a restricted culture of the research findings. Large data companies have no responsibility to make their data available, and they have total control over who gets to see them. Big data researchers with access to priority data sets are less likely to choose questions that are continuous to a social media company if they think it may result in their access being cut. The current ecosystem around big data creates a new kind of digital divide, the big data rich and the big data poor. Some company researchers have even gone so far as to suggest that academics should not bother studying social media datasets at all. Jimmy Lin, a professor on industrial sabbatical at Twitter, argued that academics should not engage in research that industry can do better. Such explicit efforts to demarcate research insiders and outsiders, while by no means new, undermine the research community. By arguing, whenever inequalities are explicitly written into the system, they produce class-based structures. Again, Manovich writes of three classes of people in the realm of big data: those who create data, those who have the means to collect it, and those who have expertise to analyze it. We know that the last group is the smallest and the most privileged. They're also the ones who get to determine the rules about how big data will be used and who gets to participate. While institutional inequalities may be a foregone conclusion in academia, they should nevertheless be examined and questioned. They produce a bias in the data and the types of research that emerge. By arguing that the big data phenomenon is implicated in some broad historical and philosophical shifts is not to suggest it is solely accountable. The academy is by no means the sole driver behind the computational turn. There is a deep government and industrial drive towards gathering and extracting maximal value from data, be it informative that will lead to more targeted advertising, product design, traffic planning, or criminal policing. But we don't think there are serious and wide-range implications of the apprioritization of big data and what it will mean for future research agendas. I'll take the question. This philosophical question with the context to big data itself is relative to human duality and non-duality concepts of enlightenment, which I think takes next dimension of data and beyond human experience, I suppose, something similar to the ontology of old Hindu texts and philosophy. Yes, I agree on that. I mean, I'm very happy to speak. If you ask my personal opinion, not what is written in articles and books about the philosophy of big data and digital humanities, I will say that for me, it has not, the critical distance and time to react on these phenomena has not yet emerged. We're not there yet to be able to look critically on what is happening with big data. I will now wrap up with the critiques of big data, because I have only 5 minutes to tell you why we're not doing big data on my classes. But please, if you have any questions or comments that you want me to react on this webinar, please feel free to write them down now. So what are the alternatives to this approach for us, for the people who are interested in the cities, for the people who want to get to know city, or to get some, or to be able to pose questions and to get the answer for that? In my class, in my course, I try to introduce one of the ways how you can find the way in this big data, small data, objective, subjective, quantitative, qualitative metrics. And my question is, by going completely other direction, by going to a small scale, to everyday geographers of yourself and your neighbors, and asking questions that are came from your knowledge, your personal embodied experience of the urban environment, or by any of your personal feelings. And here is just a picture of one of my favorite picture of Richard Long art, which is the line drawn just in the park. Or the next is several lines which were presented in the urban environment. It's very minimalistic land art, just to make you just so you have a possibility to ask yourself, why is that less important? Why are observations about everyday geographers of your neighborhood, why you as one of the actors and people in the city are less important? And by these practices, the contemporary practices of neighborhooding in contemporary post-Soviet Moscow are less important than analysis of, Facebook tweets. And this is one of the examples which you never be able to find and pick up through the analysis of generated big data data sets. So there is much more in the city, in the material side of the city, which is there for you to look at, to approach, to question, and to try to find the answers to. And in my course, I don't care how small is it, I don't care how personal is it, but if it reveals one of the sides of contemporary life in post-Soviet Moscow, I'm very happy to, if we proceed with that in our class, and by the series of pictures, or by a film, or by any textual form, will approach these phenomena. Yes, this is one of my favorite works of self-organized markets, one of the metro station in Moscow, which was captured in a series of one of my students, Pablo David Golden. But it's just a remark. So this is I will wrap up because we don't have a lot of time left. I will wrap up just by saying that there is a lot of data in the city which is visible, there is a lot of data in the city which is visible, approachable, and which can be used for getting the knowledge about the city, and for maybe more important, for asking your question about the city and finding the answers. But you need to be the one, you need to be expert to know how to pose the questions, which data to pick up for your analysis, and you should be the one who interpreted the data. Do not just go with a data set. Do not buy into the data sets and the analysis that is there ready for you. There is a lot of things which are not clear and are not well shaped right now, and you can be caught in something not really interesting and profound. So just don't buy into that blindly. You should develop yourself as a researcher, as a thinker. You should critically ask whatever you see, whatever you read, whatever your data is given to you. It's your field of expertise and it's your field of responsibility to be able to pose the question of how this city operates, what exactly do you want to know, what data do you need, where do you get it, what is there about the metadata, how you're going to analyze it, do you actually believe in this data, do you trust it, and do you need any other people to help you to interpret the result. I was skipping some of the parts in my paper, but there was an example of very high-level correlation between, I think, one of the stock indexes in Wall Street and flowering patterns in Bangladesh, which big data actually picked up. And of course, that is something that is never going to happen in real world. So it's your expertise, it's your knowledge. Don't be led just by the amount of data and about possibilities that arise with big data turn. If there are no other questions, I'm happy to wrap up. And thank you very much for joining us. You can Google me, find my email, and please get in contact with me or with our master program if you have any other questions or if there anything else you want me to ask about. Thank you and have a very nice evening.